Nish Kumar, welcome to Ultimate 11. How are you?
Very well. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. Excited to hear your team.
Well, we're all living through the latest phase of the lockdown,
Yeah.
and so we've all got a lot of time on our hands. So, I mean, one of one of the things that's fun to do is to spend a lot of time thinking about sports and old sports teams.
Yeah. How did you watch the semi-final yesterday?
Yeah, it was a really strange evening because I had the semi-final on my iPad and I had the news on the television.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of watching the collapse of the American experiment in time with watching the latest Solskjaer era collapse in a semi-final of a major tournament. Um, yeah, it
Yeah.
was yes, it was. I started to get worried because I watched the first half of City play Chelsea at the weekend,
Yeah.
and I thought that looked ominous.
Yeah.
And him bringing back Gundogan seems to have rebalanced the entire team and putting Foden out on the left. And you look at all that and you think, I, I don't care for this, frankly.
Yeah. I thought going into it, I thought United had a decent chance, like with the way they've been playing fairly recently.
Yeah,
And the build up to it. I thought it was going to be I didn't watch all of it, but it looked fairly categorical. A pretty solid 2-0 away win.
yeah, United struggled. City were very resolute.
Yeah.
United really struggled to create many chances of note, to be
Yeah.
honest. And the United's defense is not organised enough, and City's attack is too good for you know United are going to give chances away at some stage.
Yeah.
Um, Especially because City just played with a bit more ambition because the league game was, I mean, it was a tricky watch.
Yeah, it was quite
The
bleak,
league
wasn't
game
it?
was, yeah, but it's because Guardiola was so paranoid about United's strength on the counter that he seemed to
Yeah,
just not try and go forward. But but yeah, yesterday they seem to have got the balance right. The problem United have, I think, is just a bit of there's a couple of players that are just being overplayed, and coming out of the Christmas period, particularly players like Fernandez and
mm,
Rashford look knackered, and especially when Fernandez is tired, as he was at points towards the very end of last season, and again he seems to be showing signs of fatigue. He's the sort of he's the he's the kind of the central figure in the attacking
yeah,
force that is that team.
the talisman.
And
Yeah,
he really is, the whole team is structured around him. I mean, the reason the results have swung upwards since he's arrived, I think, is because he fulfills a role that United haven't had anyone in for a while.
yeah,
And he sits in that number 10 position and he threads the attacks together and he moves the ball at speed, which is kind of the strength of this team. And I think I think Solskjaer just needs to be really careful with overplaying him because also Fernandez doesn't really have a second gear. Like he isn't someone who can just sort of give it 60% for an hour and then be taken off for a
yeah, yeah,
rest.
yeah,
He plays the game at full throttle. He's always the player who's, in the top 3 or 4 players in terms of how far he's run in the game. He sprints all over the place. He's closing down. He joins in every attack. He's very involved. And I think with that type of player, you need to be a bit more, you need to be really careful with him because he can just burn himself out.
yeah,
Um, I'm sort of hoping he doesn't play in the FA Cup, which I know is, English footballing sacrilege to do
yeah.
prioritise the FA Cup, but he needs to get him off.
Yeah, I think Solskjaer's probably going to rest players for the FA Cup. I think he has to,
Yeah.
um, especially when you're so competitive in the league this year and now out of the Carabao Cup. I think it just makes sense to put
And
all of
also,
your
there's
eggs
like,
in the league basket.
there's more. There's good players in that squad. I'd
Yeah,
love to see Van der Beek get a bit more game time. I'd love to see um, Mata play, because whenever Mata
Yeah.
has played this season, he's looked really good. And so I'd love to see those players get a bit of a look in. Um,
Doesn't sound like Van der Beek's got much more time left at the club. Apparently, people are saying that he's on his way out already, which I think it seems it's probably
I
just
think that would be a
scaremongering.
crazy move
Yeah.
for the club. I don't know whether from the player's perspective, because obviously he's gone from being a really central figure in an incredibly successful Ajax team to being, on the peripheries at United. And he's on the peripheries for no real fault of his own. I mean, who knows? It's always one of these things where you don't know what's going on in training, but certainly every time he's played, he's looked lively.
Yeah.
And he's a young player. He's 23, I think. There's a lot to come from him.
Yeah. And I think they announced the signing of Diallo today as well, Hamid Diallo from Atlanta. So
yeah,
there's probably with the rumors of that happening now and him just not looking like he particularly wants to play second fiddle. That's probably where all the rumors have come from.
And I
mean,
I can understand from his perspective why. I think from the club's perspective, it would be a crazy thing, especially because it does increasingly seem like everybody thinks Pogba is going to leave in the summer.
Yeah.
And so from the club's perspective, you've got to think there's definitely space for him in the future.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he's just an awful person.
Yeah.
I'd like to say I don't necessarily believe that myself, but maybe that's what's happening behind the scenes. Right. So yeah, your Man United team, your all-time ultimate Man United 11 of favourite players. How's it been?
So I've tried to think about this, not just in terms of my favourite players, but how I would mould a favourite team of mine. So I've given some thought. As I say, we've all got a lot of time on our hands. So I've really given some thought to how best balance this 11.
You've really sort of gone Football Manager style
to
this ultimate 11.
Football Manager really is the ultimate game for somebody like me.
I'm so worried that I'm going to download it again this lockdown and then just like lose my job and my wife.
I can't have it in the house.
Yeah,
I've got a PlayStation and I've got FIFA on the PlayStation, and I quite enjoy playing that. And I play online with my friends, which is quite a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
But I can't have Football Manager in my house all my life.
No.
When I was 27, I had just finished doing my first Edinburgh show at the Fringe in August, and which is quite sort of the first stand-up hour you do is quite a big part of your career, and it was it takes a lot of work, and as with everything in your life, a couple of years later you forget about it and it never really mattered in the first place, but at the time it feels like an extremely important thing. And I was in that September, basically what I was doing a lot was like my flat needed to be, there were people who needed to, my landlord was renovating the flat that I was living in. And so I basically had to sort of just let people in. And that was all I had to do all day was just let my landlord would I'd get a text and say, thing is happening tomorrow. Can you make sure you let them in at 8:30? And I'd get up to let them in at 8:30. And that was my only responsibility that day. I didn't have any work. I didn't have anything on. And so I basically played Football Manager for a month. And after that, I gave the disc to a charity shop, and I've never bought another one.
Yeah. No, during the first lockdown, I was like Googling how can I play for Football Manager on a Mac, and there's all of these forums of how to do it and how to download it, and I was like, if I read too much here, I'm just gonna get lost in that black hole again.
I just think I can't. I remember thinking, look, I'm 27, like I can't lose a month of my life anymore to playing a video game, and now I'm 35, so that's not got better.
Yeah,
I'll save it for retirement. I feel like if I make it to a retirement age and the Earth hasn't been swallowed by some sort of climate change induced disaster, and somehow through some miracle I've like find some gold that I can use as a pension. If I retire, I'll take up heroin and Football Manager. I've decided that that's what I'm going to do with my sunset list.
Equally as addictive as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna lapse into a fugue state through opiates and then get Old Trafford renamed the Nish Kumar Stadium.
Oh dear. Right. So for your team, first of all, what formation are you playing?
I'm playing a 4-1-4-1.
4-1-4-1. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And we can. It's all partly to deal with a specific bugbear of mine about the Manchester United midfield in the late 90s that we can get into as we get into it, I suppose.
Right. Okay. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm a bit disappointed that, based on the last couple of months, you haven't just played 11 left wingers. I thought that would be a real fuck you, Farage. But we'll go 4-1-4-1. That's good enough.
Just Giggs, Lee Sharp.
Yeah,
just get them all out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, 4-1-4-1. Okay, that's fairly traditional. We've had some pretty unexpected formations on the podcast so far, but I think that's fairly, that's a preset formation in Football Manager.
Yeah, yeah. You
don't have to be moving any players around.
Yeah, you don't have to be moving anybody
getting
around.
Shouted out by your assistant manager. Okay, so starting in goal.
Schmeichel.
Peter Schmeichel.
This was, I mean, not completely simple, because De Gea has certainly had his moments, and in terms of the aesthetics of goalkeeping, there's very few more exciting goalkeepers. Certainly there were in his peak, because of his unorthodox style of, like, somebody told him he can't use his hands when he was 10. And so now he seems to be able to only save things with his legs. But and Van der Sar was incredible. And also Van der Sar was so amazing because he was the solution to, a problem that dogged United really immediately after Schmeichel retired, because the succession of Barthez, Bosnich, and the less said about Massimo Taibbi, the better. But it was a problem that dogged United for a long time. And as soon as Van der Sar played, it was like, oh great, that makes total. This is great. This is perfect. Yeah. But I think I would probably Schmeichel just about shades it for me.
I think Van der Sar was probably my favorite United keeper. Like the era that he played in, the team that he played in was probably my favorite United team. But as a Southampton fan, I have very fond memories of both Schmeichel and Taibbi.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
so does Matt Letizia.
Schmeichel was the keeper in the 6-3, wasn't he?
Yeah, the one that he chipped from outside the box, where he turned David May, I think, and then chipped at the Dell. And it was one of Letizier's best goals. I mean, again, it's impossible for this podcast to go past without me mentioning Matt Letizia. So
of course. Why would you? Southampton were a real bogey team for United in that period, and that was the infamous grey kit.
It was
the away game where Ferguson, like, the man's talent for transferring blame onto irrelevant things was absolutely second to none. It's the kit. They can't. They're invisible.
Yeah. Okay, so Schmeichel in goal. It's you can't really argue.
There was something
with that,
imposing about him. I think also he was. I was a little kid when he was. He seemed like a giant man. He just seemed larger than. It looked like an 18-year-old had been allowed to play with some 7-year-olds. There was something about his presence that just seemed incredibly just imposing. And he was, the speed at which he'd come off his line, that sort of Danish handball thing, sort of unusual techniques that he had in terms of sort of being able to, like, stoop and flick the ball up. It was all pretty incredible. And I mean, he just seemed to have an aura about him that intimidated opposition strikers. Obviously not Matt Letizia, but it was you can't have everything.
No. So Schmeichel behind your back four. We'll start on the left-hand side. Who is your ultimate 11 left back?
The ultimate 11 left back. Again, quite a close run thing, because when he's not licking raw chickens, Patrice Evra is an absolute delight. But I will go with the man who looks like he was on the pitch to do everyone else's tax return, Dennis Irwin. Just a great player.
What a hero.
The discrepancy of what sort of interesting flair player he was as a left back to his appearance is extraordinary.
He looked, you're right. He looked like an accountant.
He looked like, and he, even when you see him interviewed, he sort of wears the shirts of an accountant. But Dennis Irwin was a sort of, especially the era that he was playing in, he's quite a sort of interesting, progressive fullback. And who used to take penalties. And he was a sort of really, really interesting all-round player.
Yeah, he would definitely be, if fantasy football had been around then, he would definitely be like the sort of expensive defender that you just have all season, guaranteed at least 15 clean sheets, and would sort of pipe up with 2 or 3 goals, either penalties or
quite a few goals, and just ice cold as a penalty taker as well. Just absolutely ice cold.
Yeah, he was quite it just sort of went under the radar a little bit. It was almost one of those players that it wasn't until he stopped playing people realized how good he was.
But he spanned across the first 2 great Fergie teams, and he was undroppable in those, across those 2 teams, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and he could play on the left or the right. He was both footed.
He was a right-footed left back.
Yeah,
just what a player to have in your team.
Yeah, excellent. So we got a left back and a tax lawyer. That's good. In case Schmeichel runs into some tax issues. So moving along, centre backs.
Instinctively, I would have said Stam and Ferdinand, but this being us trying to find the right balance, I will pick the pair. I will pick the hail and pace of late 2000s central defending. I'll take Vidic and Ferdinand. Just because I just think what else could you look for in a defensive partnership? They had absolutely complementary skills. Vidic looks like somebody who's trying to extract information from James Bond.
Yeah, can you imagine him stood next to Dennis Irwin?
How are these two the same species?
Yeah.
But I think that defensive partnership was just unimpeachable, and they had absolutely complementary skills. But also Vidic could play. Vidic was much better on the ball. Certainly, I mean, my YouTube algorithm was just full of old football clips, but certainly watching the United team of that era, you realise Vidic was an extremely capable ball player. Certainly, I associate him with the more physical elements of defending, and I associate Ferdinand with the sort of elegance, the kind of Rolls Royce centre back, the no grass stains on his shorts guy. But actually, they were also both equally capable of doing the things the other was strong at.
I cannot remember Vidic ever being that kind of player at all. I just all my memories are of him with like broken noses. And punching people and
him heading very low balls. You could have kicked that, definitely. But definitely going back and watching a few games, you realise that he was, he wasn't a passenger in the style of football that team was trying to play. And equally, Ferdinand was also excellent in the air and very much capable of putting in tough tackles. And
Ferdinand definitely was sort of best of both worlds. Like he was just, absolutely world class.
I think he was for me, he's my favorite defender. Just to watch play, he's my favorite defender ever, because I mean, I remember the 2002 World Cup for England and feeling like he was one of the players of that tournament for the England team that really looked like he belonged in the kind of upper echelons of the world game. And then obviously just watching him kick on and absolutely doing that in his career. But he, you know, I mean, he barely put a foot wrong for about 3 years. There was a game particularly I think of when between United and Liverpool in the 2007-8 season, and it was being sort of hyped up because Torres was really in the ascendancy, and this kind of hyped confrontation between Ferdinand and Torres. And I barely remember Torres touching the ball. And it wasn't, Ferdinand had that ability to anticipate where the striker was going to make the move and where the midfielder was going to pick the pass. And he was always there before it happened. And he was just always one step ahead of everyone who was around him. At his best.
And if he wasn't, Vidic was there just to kick them in the shins.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the next season, Liverpool, there's not really, it's a pretty extraordinary thing, but like Torres man-marked Vidic. Because Torres really had this sort of hoodoo over Vidic after this game where I think they won, is it 4-1?
Is it 3-0? Oh yeah,
3 or 4-1
at Old Trafford. Yeah, I remember that.
But Torres very specifically was trying to target Vidic and run directly at him, because Vidic's weakness really was his pace, and Torres was trying to target him. But part of the reason that happened was because the previous year Torres barely touched the ball. And Ferdinand was always just one step ahead of the game. His reading of the game was absolutely second to none in that era. I mean, maybe only someone like PK and Boateng maybe are the two players that I've seen since that have that. But Ferdinand really, and especially for an English defender, and we, our sort of obsession in this country with our sort of footballing mentality. I mean, it's definitely changed now, but certainly when we were growing up, that era, it was about centre backs. It was about it was Terry Butcher. It was about you weren't a real defender if you didn't sustain a serious head wound in a game. Like if you didn't walk off covered in blood. And John Terry was very much a player in that mold. And I always feel with John Terry, part of the reason he had to make these like diving headers was because he was in the wrong position in the first place. And Ferdinand never had to do that stuff because he had already thought 2 steps ahead. And some of like John Terry's, great brave defending was actually just an inability to see what was going on. And so whatever team I was picking, whatever era I was playing in, Rio Ferdinand, there's no one else I'd rather have playing at centre back.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's a great partnership. Pretty solid. So I don't know if you even play football or what position you play, but you sort of strike me as a bit of a ball playing centre back. Would that be fair?
That's how I like to think of myself. I think how I would be described is as a more robust centre back. I think I'm more Neil Ruddock than Rio Ferdinand.
Fair enough.
But I certainly like to think of myself.
Yeah.
I certainly like to think of myself as a cultured ball playing central defender.
Okay, so 3 of your back 4 done. Who's playing right back? I feel like this is probably going to be an obvious one.
Yeah, you can't. You can't listen.
Phil Neville, right? Phil Neville.
Yeah, of course. Big Phil. You listen. Did Wes Brown have an incredible season at right back for Manchester United 2007 to 2008? Yes, he did. He was absolutely incredible, and oft forgotten, set up Ronaldo's goal in the final.
Yeah.
But obviously it's Gary Neville. Gary Neville. Before you get into what sort of player he was, I don't know that there's anyone that I associate with the football club more than Gary Neville. In terms of a player, I don't know if there's anybody who you could identify as closely as being a Man United man.
Yeah.
It's in his blood. It's him celebrating John O'Shea's last-minute goal against Liverpool. It's one of the most extraordinary pieces of television you've ever seen. That it meant something. It definitely meant something beyond football to him. But also as a player, he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And he had a kind of defensive robustness. From what I understand, growing up, never the most talented player. But just somebody who decided very early on that he was just going to work harder and apply himself more.
Very good cricketer, apparently, Gary Neville and Phil.
I've heard that about both the Neville brothers.
Yeah,
Isn't there
I think
a picture?
I think Phil was better than Gary, possibly.
Is there a picture of? There is a picture of Matt Hayden and Phil Neville. I think it might be Gary actually. Yeah, of Matthew Hayden, where they must have been somehow they were playing club cricket together. I guess Hayden must have done some summers in England.
Yeah.
But there's a photo of the two of them together. But yeah, apparently amazing cricketers.
I have to say as well, like Gary Neville, fantastic career. He just was, just the ultimate right back. Yeah. And if you'd have said to me that he was the person from that Man United team in that Man United era that would go on to have the most successful TV punditry career, I would have laughed in your face. And not just to have a TV punditry career, but be sort of so well respected and also like fairly not controversial, but he's not. If you get Dennis Irwin on BT Sport, he's just going to sit there and roll out all the old classic, tropes. Whereas and if you Gary Neville he's able to sort of form his own opinion. I mean, Roy Keane is just a parody of himself. Like,
I feel sorry for him because he seems to be trapped in some kind of Faustian pact that means he always has to watch football, a sport which brings him no pleasure whatsoever. And so I think what's nice about Neville is that he understands the game and he understands how to communicate that understanding. He's articulate and he's interested in tactics and he's able to give the insight for what it was like to the mentality players require at the top level. Yeah. But also he is genuinely enthused by the game. And I mean, the noise that comes out of his body when Torres scores against Barcelona. There's another one actually that I think is almost better than that. I think it's a 14-15 season, Messi against Bayern Munich, when Messi at the Nou Camp puts Boateng on his arse.
Oh yeah.
There's a noise that comes out of Gary. There's a noise that comes out of Gary Neville's body that is purely sexual.
Yeah, even when he's like in the Sky Sports studio and like doing Monday Night Football, he'll just start talking about like Paul Pogba or something, and then just emit these bizarre sounds. It's fantastic to watch.
He's a fantastic broadcaster. Yeah, and he loves the game, and he loves talking about the game. And listen, there is obviously I also love the fact that he's one of the few people who, when he was asked about racism in football, absolutely just turned it around and said, what do you expect with this prime minister? Like he's one of the few people who he was very forthright in his views on the subject, which I really admired. But as a player, he's an absolutely brilliant right back. I mean, it's interesting to see the way that the game has gone and the changing role of fullbacks and, but it's...
I think by his own admission, he would not be a successful right back in modern day football.
But you can sort of look at it and go, he'd probably end up playing on the right of a back three now, because I still think that level of the nous that he brought to the game and also the sort of competitive spirit that he brought to the game was in the 90s. We all thought he was an attacking right back. We thought that's what we did. We used to watch the Brazilian teams and think, well, obviously that's Brazil, that's insane. Cafu was basically playing as a fourth centre forward, but yeah, of his era there wasn't a better defensive right back.
Okay, So back four done. Moving forward to your holding midfielder, but behind your four in midfield. It's an interesting
Yes.
position. I can't really picture. I can sort of guess who it might be, but I can't really picture this person ever playing in that position at United.
This is where I'm going to stick Michael Carrick.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
This is where Michael Carrick comes into things, and this is sort of me having an axe to grind, having two axes to grind. I think the first axe I have to grind is Michael Carrick was an incredible midfielder, the best English midfielder of his generation, who played in the most successful club side of his era, won absolutely everything that it was possible for him to win. And the principal charge against Michael Carrick appears to be that he wasn't as good as Javi, who is the best midfielder of all time.
Yeah. It was tricky because he was like, he should have played more for England, but he was at the mercy of, like, everyone was trying to work out how to fit in Scholes, Gerrard and Lampard into the same team. It's like, well, if you picked one of those and Carrick, you'd probably be all right.
Yeah, of course. And it was also a, there's no way if Michael Carrick was 25 now, he wouldn't be starting in the England team. There's more of a sense that Southgate, I think one of the reasons why people are so excited by Southgate is just for the first time, there seems to be a manager who has a plan for how he wants the team to play and isn't simply selecting the top 11 fantasy football players every year and then desperately trying to crowbar them in and, playing Paul Scholes at left back and Wayne Rooney in goal so that you can accommodate, Emil Heskey. Like it was such a strange era. We spent so much time talking about Gerrard and Lampard. I guess it was evidence of maybe we had less going on in domestic politics in the early 2000s. Maybe that's what it was. Now we've got Brexit to argue about, and maybe that has given us a blessed relief from it. But I definitely remember mainly people arguing about the Iraq War and Gerrard versus Lampard in the mid 2000s, which is insane because obviously you just pick what they play in the same position, pick one. But it was very, or you have to, if you want to pick both of them, you have to, for some reason, I think there was some law passed in 1957 that meant England only could play with 4-4-2. Fortunately, that law was repealed at some point, but there's just this like weird obsession. I guess also the first England team I can really remember was managed by Terry Venables, who was a European and progressive coach, and so was playing the Christmas tree formation. And whereas there's this sort of Ericsson Capello period, there's this kind of rigid, it had to be 4-4-2 and it had to be Gerrard and Lampard. And so there was always this kind of strange thing where it's like, we don't have a left winger. Okay, and you're like, okay, so could you adjust the ball? No. We've got these two guys who are both incredible players and two of the best players in their position, but it's the same position. Can you pick one? No. And it was almost like England were obsessed to like setting themselves Saw style horror problems. Like what it's it's like trying to get the fox, chicken, and the grain across a river. Like, why these aren't problems that you have to set yourself. And obviously, like, Michael Carrick was a great casualty of that era. But he was a great midfielder, and the sort of, taking aside the international stuff, the charge that's set against him is the two European Cup finals against Barcelona in 2009 and 2011. And I mean, there's a few things going on. I think primarily, you're probably talking about, it's certainly in my lifetime, the best football team I've ever seen, particularly the 2011 Barcelona team were an absolute absurdity. And to try and play in midfield against Xavi and Iniesta and Busquets, and then in both the finals, because Messi plays as a false nine, you're essentially trapped in a sort of angled square of a nightmare. Like, it's a nightmare scenario when you look and Busquets is at the base, Xavi and Iniesta either side, and then you're trying to work out where the hell Messi is playing. I don't think. But also more than that, he was left on his own really in those games.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that kind of, it's not really his. It
Yeah.
wasn't really his job. Like, it wasn't really what he was good at. Was being the kind of midfielder that would break up a midfield triangle of Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets. Like, he was the Xavi or Iniesta person who would get the ball, find space, and find the right pass. Like, Man United was sincerely lacking in those finals and in that team a kind of, the Busquets person who was just gonna. It was almost like the sort of protector, like good on the ball, but would be the person who would put their foot in and break up attacks and disrupt the opposition midfield. Whereas that wasn't really Carrick's role.
I also think that he, because he did play in front of the back four, and that was where he was most comfortable. But he was often just on his own. I think in the 2007-8 season, there was, he would often play with Scholes, and then he would often play with. It sounds mad to say this now, but 2007 and 8, Anderson had a fantastic season. Anderson had a really, really impressive first year in English football. And because of how he played after that season, it sort of all got a bit forgotten. But Anderson played really well. And also, the other thing that's forgotten is in a lot of those big games, Owen Hargreaves was playing.
Yeah.
And so Carrick was often not as abandoned as he subsequently was. Largely because, Anderson sort of went off the boil. And there wasn't really a partner for him in central midfield because he either needed somebody who was he just needed numbers around him. And often he was just the last line of defense in front of the back four coming up against one of the best teams to ever play the game. But I think I thought he was a brilliant midfielder, and he just sort of sat at the base of midfield and, and kind of ran the United midfield for 5 years.
Yeah. I love Michael Carrick. He was so good to watch. I'd completely forgotten about him, to be honest. When you were talking about 4-1-4-1, I was thinking that's got to be Nicky Butt or Roy Keane.
Well, Nicky Butt was also, like, Fergie used to use Nicky Butt really effectively. A lot of away games in the Champions League in 98-99, if you'll notice, Scholes didn't play. And he would often bring Butt in to bring a bit of stability into that midfield.
Yeah. Well, he didn't play in the final, did he, Scholes? He missed the.
He was suspended. Him and Keane and him were both. I think if they'd been available, they'd have played.
Yeah.
Final was that weird team because I think Giggs was started on the right, Blomqvist started on the left, and the central midfield I think was Nicky Butt and David Beckham.
Yeah.
Because that was how, they were scrambling because what do you do if you lose? You lose Keane, fine, but if you lose Scholes, fine, but if you lose Keane and Scholes, in a way, it's a miracle United made it to the last. And I mean, there was some assistance from the posts and some slightly iffy Bayern Munich finishing, but it was kind of amazing United got to within. I mean, given that they lost those two players, it was pretty extraordinary.
Okay, so going forward again to your midfield four, we'll start on the left-hand side. And now that you've mentioned him, I really hope it's Jesper Blomqvist. just like a real kind of wild card. Fuck you, Ryan Giggs. It's Jesper Blomqvist gets the.
It did cross my mind. Now I think this midfield four is probably going to be. This would probably be my most contentious selection.
Okay. I thought you were going to say it's going to be like bread and butter.
No, I mean, look,
exactly who it's going to be.
I think it possibly is, but I think this is going to be where it's getting spicy. So I'll tell you three of the four because I think it's probably easy. That is less controversial.
Okay.
So from the right hand side and the central midfield is the 98-99 trio: Beckham, Keane, Scholes.
Okay.
And part of that is also just I have a slight axe to grind. I always thought that I always thought that like maybe like the biggest mistake Fergie made was the signing of Varane after the 99
Yeah,
2000 season. Not because Varane was Varane was an incredible player,
yeah,
but I think because he wasn't the right type of player that United needed at that time.
yeah. He was a bit of a luxury player, wasn't he? Like, just sort of like to stand there and ping 60-yard passes and
Yeah,
look
and I think
quite good.
he didn't really resolve the, because I think someone like Carrick had a bit more defensive solidity to him,
Yeah,
and I think that what Varane was great at was kind of what Keane and Scholes were great at, which was moving the ball from front to back and starting attacks and finishing attacks.
yeah,
And Keane, for all his kind of reputation as a kind of physical footballer, which is largely because he committed a few, let's call them what they are, hate
attempted
crimes.
murders.
Yeah, attempted murders. Yeah. He does, and also because his autobiography reads like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. I don't know if you've read Roy Keane's autobiography, but it's brilliant. For a football autobiography, it's absolutely brilliant. But it is written in the kind of Spartan prose of a Zodiac letter. Like, it really is like, I'll do it. I got him. I nailed Haaland. Like, but what that does mask is Roy Keane was actually a very accomplished technical midfielder whose short passing was incredible. And like Keane's, because the sort of collective memory of the Juventus semi-final is Keane kind of Roy the Rovers-ing Manchester United, effectively like dragging them up, running all over the pitch, yelling at people. But his account of the game is much more interesting because his whole focus was just, after United went 2 down, was just retaining possession. And he talks a lot about how all he wanted to do was just keep the ball and build United's confidence. And he was a really sharp short passer, and he made those kind of great late runs into the box. And the goal he scored, I mean, one of the sort of great Premier League era games, the game at Highbury in the 99 2000 season, when him and Vieira killed each other. Like, the closest we'll ever see to what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. But him and Vieira are kind of quite similar players as well.
Yeah.
And in terms of, they're slightly misremembered as these kind of thugs, but who were both actually very capable, technically excellent central midfielders who were pretty complete footballers and really dominated the teams that they played in. And I think Keane and Scholes, again, it's the perfect double act in central midfield. And having Carrick protecting them and being comfortable playing deeper, I think is what I think Fergie was trying to get at. I think for him, he was just trying to get a more cultured midfielder in so that United could mix with the continental teams, because they took that hiding against Real Madrid the season that they were retaining the European Cup. And I think that hiding and Vicente Del Bosque characterizing, I think you believe the phrase he used was tactical anarchy of the Fergie United team, I think probably did sting him a little bit. And Varane was a brilliant player, but Varane just wasn't quite the right type of player that United midfield needed. And it was a shame, because it sort of led to the breakup of one of the great British and Irish midfields. One of the great all-time midfields. Just so much skill, technical ability, and just played so much exciting one-touch football. And Scholes is just, Scholes is a perfect footballer.
Well, he's just an alien. He's like he's sort of not of this world. I mean, we could spend the whole time just talking about how good Paul Scholes is, but he's just by far and away the best midfielder to have ever played in the Premier League.
Yeah, he was just an extraordinary player. Just get so much time. Had that ability to just pop up in the penalty area. It could also and then at one point ended up almost playing as a second striker. The season, I think it was it 2000 and 2001. He was almost playing as a second striker behind Van Nistelrooy. and was very effective there. And then by the end of his career was basically playing as a quarterback.
Yeah.
Couldn't tackle for love nor money.
No. Did you hear Jamie O'Hara the other day? Because there was this whole thing on, I can't remember who it was. I think they were talking on Talksport about Paul Ince.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who it was. Someone said that Paul Ince was like in the top 5 greatest midfielders in Europe of all time or something like that. And like ahead of Scholes, ahead of Gerrard and all this kind of rubbish. And don't get me wrong, Paul Ince was a good player. But Jamie O'Hara sort of took quite personal offence to that and sort of said, I played against Paul Scholes and he is so much better than anyone realises and any of the players that you've ever named. But he was saying that Paul Scholes was actually a good tackler. Like when he sliced people in half, it was because he wanted to, not because he couldn't tackle, which I think is probably true as well.
Well, I think So I think Keane and Scholes, and then Carrick sat
on the right.
Them.
Yeah,
and then on the right, it's Mr. Beckham.
D-Bex. Yeah,
Mr. Beckham, because
again underrated as a midfielder.
I think
he's a free kick merchant.
It's almost become a cliche now to say that Beckham was an underrated midfielder. Maybe that's because I read a lot of United blogs and United Twitter stuff.
Yeah,
but you can question what his record was for England. I mean, he was the best English player for England in his era. For England, he certainly delivered for England, but not on major tournaments, and that's something that's a whole other conversation. But as a United player, he was unimpeachable, and he what's striking when you go back and watch the highlights of the treble year is how essential he is to the functioning of that whole team. And just flying up and down that right. I mean, we were talking with Gary Neville about how he would have fit in as a modern fullback. I mean, this consensus seems to be from people who understand these things better than I do that Beckham would now be possibly a right back or at least a right wing back. But I just think that the ability he had to cross a ball would be useful in any era of the game. I mean, it was just the precision of it, and the ability he had to just him and Dwight York. I mean, York and Cole are obviously the great partnership of that team, but the sort of unsung partnership of that team is Beckham and York, because Beckham made a lot of goals for York, and they seem to have a good understanding just at a longer range than York and Cole. But it was just he was an absolutely incredible player, and he turned up in the biggest moments and the biggest games for United, and just an absolute, just a workhorse, and then just lethal.
So is your left winger then the slightly controversial?
Yeah, I guess so, because I think in theory
because it's not Ryan Giggs.
It's not Ryan Giggs, and it's not Cristiano Ronaldo, who I guess if you're not playing him on the right, you should probably play him on the left. And it's not even really huge, even in footballing terms, but the emotion I have for Marcus Rashford, I can't explain it. I feel that he is my son. I don't know how to explain it to you other than that. If I feel like he is my large adult son that I somehow sired at the age of 12, and the depth of feeling I have for Marcus Rashford is sort of beyond anything else that I can possibly explain to you. I love him so much. I think he's a wonderful player, and he really has a huge amount of potential. But if I'm honest, he should not be in this team. But I will not hear a word said against him.
No. What a legend. What a year as well. What a year he's had.
What a year. What an unbelievable year. You know, he took on the government and won. It's pretty incredible. But even before that, I don't know what it is about him, but I absolutely love the guy.
Yeah.
I just
when he sort of burst onto the scene a couple of years ago, that was a really, it sort of felt like a good moment for Man United, because there's been so few people that have done that in recent history, and looked like they could be like proper Man United legends.
Yeah.
Martial, when he moved, he started well and he scored that goal against Liverpool, but it wasn't the same sort of thing.
I think that there is an interesting thing with both of them, where I think they're the tenure of nation sweetheart Jose Mourinho at Old Trafford had a number of different negative consequences, seemingly for the club and for the man Mourinho.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I have stayed at the Lowry Hotel and it's lovely. I'm not sure how I would have taken living there for 2 years, was it?
Yeah. In that case,
like obviously it was a weird time for him, but I think that both those players have had their development arrested slightly by the Mourinho period, because I mean, there was some diabolical football played under Louis van Gaal, and particularly in the last season under him. But he did leave a kind of core of quite talented young players at the club, and particularly Rashford and Martial, who are evidently talented footballers. But then Jose, by sort of bringing in Ibra and Lukaku, both of whom, I mean, obviously Ibra's a fantastic player. I think Lukaku is a great centre forward. But I think that by bringing those two players in, it kind of shunted them to the side a little bit. And I think neither of them is where they probably should be. I mean, if you consider that where Ronaldo was at 23, 24, you see the value of what happens when a player with that sort of explosive talent is brought through in the right way. And then when you have talented players who then get kind of lost in, a man who's at war, like a sort of borderline Shakespearean character, who went mad at Real Madrid and has never seemingly quite recovered. Although he seems much more settled and happy at Spurs now, and all the best to him. But I feel like that their development has been slightly arrested, and I will accept that it absolutely should be Ronaldo playing in that position, and Ronaldo is the best United player I've ever seen, but I irrationally love Marcus Rashford.
Well, I mean, that's what this is all about, right? It's not you're not supposed to be picking the best Man United team. You're supposed to be picking your favorite players.
I can't defend it.
Biologically, is your favorite son.
Yeah, I will. All I will say is, I will bring death to anyone who criticizes Marcus Rashford.
There we go.
I will rain a fiery vengeance upon anyone who criticizes my large adult son.
That is the strap line for this podcast when it goes out. I will rain fiery vengeance on anyone who criticizes Marcus Rashford.
I would lay down my life for Rashford. I want that on the record.
But he wouldn't want you to. That's the thing.
No, he would want me to. He'd probably do it for me.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So we've got the 4-1-4 of this formation. I've only actually just looking at it now, I've only just realized you now have to pick one striker.
Yeah.
How have you managed to do that from the sort of deep recesses of class strikers that United have had over the years?
It's very hard, because if you look through, there's players that I think if you were picking the best outright centre forward, I think it would be difficult to look past Van Nistelrooy, because Van Nistelrooy was sort of Van Nistelrooy was a complete striker. There wasn't anything he couldn't. He was excellent in the air. If you go tight, he was able to spin and run in behind. He could play off the shoulder of the last defender. He could be a target man, and he was a sort of poacher.
He didn't score a single goal for United outside the box, did he?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah. I think that's a genuine stat. That's not this exaggeration. I think that genuinely, of all of his however many goals he scored, were all outside the box.
He scored a couple of. There are a couple of like quiet belters that involve him running from the halfway line. I think there's one against maybe Fulham. There's a great goal against Arsenal, and a couple in the Champions League that involved quite sort of distance running. I mean, in terms of the strikers who brought me most joy, it would be York and Cole. But I think if you're going to play 5 midfielders, I think you have to play both of them. I don't think either of them was quite as effective without the other one. But I guess the person I'd have to pick is Eric Cantona. Just because I think in terms of the impact at United, I don't know anyone that has had. I think you could make an argument that he's the most influential player in English football in the last 30 years, because I don't know him arriving at United when he did. I don't know if any single event has impacted the trajectory of where the English domestic game has gone more than that, because I think lots of people are trying to compare and contrast him and Fernandes, which is obviously a very fun but slightly pointless thing to do. But the thing with Cantona is that he finished off a very good team. There was a very good team in place there. Ince, Robson, Giggs, Lee Sharp, Kanchelskis. There was a nucleus, and Bruce and Pallister as well as centre-back. There was the core of a very brilliant team. And what they required was a player who was going to be able to thread all of that excellence together. There's a lot of pace and a lot of strength in that team. And what they desperately needed was a bit of guile. And it's what he provided. And it's absolutely the reason that team went from being a very good team to being the kind of dominant team for the first 2 or 3 years in the Premier League. And I think the impact that he subsequently had on the class of 92 directly, and I mean, this is something that they talk about in the documentary, and they've talked about on a number of occasions, the impact that Cantona had on them and the way that they trained, the way that they thought about the game, profound. And also just, he was so cool. He just appeared to be, he just seemed to be a different kind of player. That you can absolutely make the case that there are players who have had statistically a greater impact on the game, but that's not that. And I don't get me wrong, I understand that that's a big part of what I enjoy about football, but that's not what makes you fall in love with the game, right? What makes you fall in love with the game is mystique and romance, and that's what Eric Cantona had that very few other players have. You can, I understand that like Gerd Muller scored more goals than God or something, but you can't compare the impact of that to Ronaldinho, cocking his right leg and then toe poking the ball around Peter Cech. Like that is those moments that you sort of fall in love with the game over.
Well, also God didn't really have the service, did he? So
no.
If you were going to pick a current Man United player who is most likely to kung fu kick a Crystal Palace supporter, who would it be? I can't really picture anyone doing it.
I can't think of somebody who I kind of want to say Juan Mata, just because I feel like there has to be a dark side somewhere to that guy. He just seems like the loveliest man. I'd love the idea that he would explode with rage, just because between all of his his amazing charity work, that he would for some reason just suddenly snap. It's the same thing with Rashford, really. It'd be
the
funny
Spanish Rashford, suddenly loses it. I can't see it at all. A matter, no way.
I don't know if there's a player who I see. Listen, Bruno's got a little edge to him.
Yeah,
Bruno definitely has a little edge to him. The little push on Richarlison a couple of weeks ago was like that was a little bit spicy. And
Luke Shaw, maybe Luke Shaw. he looks like the kind of person that's got into a few scraps outside of picture and piano.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I can't see anyone. I don't know if there's anyone I know. I mean, it's sort of Cantona and Zidane, like, and the sort of there's some kind of like, I don't know. They both played football like they were protagonists in a Camus novel. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised by their propensity to a single jarring act of violence. So there's something like, I guess, like very French about them both. But
yeah,
I can't think of somebody instinctively who could. I remember that because it was that case was tried in Croydon Magistrates Court, and there was just a lot of excitement that Eric Cantona was going to be in Croydon. But yeah, he was, he kung fu kicked a guy. He was in a Ken Loach film. The guy has lived a broad and interesting life. But yeah, it's just all swagger and mystique for Cantona,
and thus completes your team. That's a good side. We've got to go through. We've got to pick some responsibilities now for this team. The first thing you need to do is pick a captain. And I'm looking at it now, and I'm pretty sure every player that you've picked has been Man United captain at one point.
Very possibly.
Schmeichel, Neville, Ferdinand, Vidic, Irwin, maybe not Carrick. I don't know. Carrick, Beckham, Keane, Scholes, Rashford, Cantona.
Apart from Carrick, possibly Carrick for a game.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
Anyway, which one of those
but
is
it
your
doesn't
captain?
Matter. There's no way it's going to be anyone other than Roy Keane.
Yeah.
Largely because I think you would imbalance the dressing room by having Roy Keane in it and not being captain.
Yeah. Okay, so Roy Keane's captain. Who's taking penalties?
Irwin.
Dennis Irwin, PK.
I don't remember Irwin missing one. I can remember Cantona missing one, but I don't remember Irwin missing one. I'm sure I'm wrong on that, but there just seemed to be something very steady about him.
With Beckham and Rashford in your team, picking Dennis Irwin ahead of it, and Cantona, picking Irwin ahead of them as penalty takers. Yeah. It's bold. I like it. But I like it's give him a bit of limelight in what is a team of pretty big characters.
Yeah.
Okay, so probably a stupid question. Who's taking free kicks?
Yeah, regardless of Rashford's knuckleball technique. Yeah, it's Irwin again. Regardless of Rashford's knuckleball technique, it's probably going to be old Bex.
Yeah, makes sense. And this again is probably another pretty redundant question, but if you are the manager of this Man United side, but you can pick any manager, past or present, to be your assistant. Well, I'll tell you what, you can give your answer, and then you can give your answer if it wasn't going to be that answer.
Yeah. It would be, yeah. I mean, obviously it's Mr. Hairdryer.
Yeah.
It's Lord Ferg.
And if it wasn't Fergie?
Well, if it wasn't Fergie, then you've got to go Busby, I guess.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he did build the football club.
That's very true.
Effectively, two guys have kind of constructed that club, and one's Ferg and the other one's Busby.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you could have two assistant managers. It's fine. Start
a
new trend.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Have two of arguably the most successful managers of all time in your dugout. Good job. And then finally, you need to pick the kit that they're going to wear. And now this, I have an answer. Not that you've asked me to provide one, but I have a Man United kit that I would definitely choose for an Ultimate 11 to wear. But be interested to hear what yours is first.
Well, I guess the first, I actually, for my brother's birthday, managed to track down a 92-93 United shirt that has the shoelaces, the shoelace thing across the top of it, which is pretty spectacular and fairly iconic. I mean, I really like the sort of collarless 0708 number, but I'm not sure you want to walk around with AIG insurance written on your chest, given what we subsequently found out about that company. I'm really not sure you want to be wandering around with that on your chest. So the kit that I really love, I have no sentimental attachment to it, but the kit that I really love is the 1968 European final kit, which
Okay.
is a kind of, it's a blue shirt. It's a really, really great shirt. It looks in the photos that they have of that era, it looks very sort of iconic. But I'll pick the sort of late 90s one. The I think it would be 96, 97, the last Cantona year.
Okay,
the collar up.
Oh, with the sort of the sleeves, with the kind of
with the sleeves,
checkerboard sleeves,
yeah,
two-tone collar, sharp sponsor. Okay, yeah, that's a good shout. I like that kit. I think my one that I had in my head was the 92, 93, that sharp with
the shoelaces
across the top. Yeah,
that's the one
no,
I sort of associate with the like with Ryan Giggs, particularly for some reason.
Yeah. The 96, 97 one, I've just Googled it. And for some reason, the immediate person that comes to mind when I see it is Jordi Cruyff.
Yeah, that's right. That was the year he joined.
Yeah.
He's one you always forget when you rewatch the treble highlights. Occasionally, Jordi Cruyff pops up. And you're like, oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, but I think that the Cantona goal against Middlesbrough and the collar up, it is an iconic look.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to read your team back to you. So you've gone 4-1-4-1, Schmeichel in goal, a back four of Gary Neville, Rio Ferdinand, Nemanja Vidic, and Dennis Irwin. Dennis Irwin is your designated penalties kick taker.
Thank you.
Love that. Your one in front of the back four, Michael Carrick. Your four midfielders, David Beckham, who's obviously taking free kicks, Roy Keane, captain, Paul Scholes, and Man United's best left winger, Marcus Rashford. And then up front, Eric Cantona, with Fergie and Sir Matt Busby alongside you, probably giving you quite a few hints as assistant managers. And then your team are wearing the 96, 97 home shirt with the checkerboard sleeves, the two-tone collar, and the sharp sponsorship. That is a pretty good United team.
It's a solid 11, no doubt about it.
Excellent stuff. Nish, thank you so much for doing this.
My absolute pleasure.
And thank you for taking us all through your ultimate Man United 11.